Greetings, Big Mechs, and welcome to Codex Compliant.
You ever think about the Shokk attack gun? Like, really think about it way too much.
One of the more fun aspects of Warhammer 40,000's orcs is their predilection towards randomness in their rules. I would say their rules were chaotic, but that just leads to confusion, what with chaos being a proper noun around here. This element of the orcs has been present since the game's first edition, and, in our opinion, no weapon captures this essence better than the Shokk attack gun. A weapon that sends snotlings through the warp, reappearing upon, and sometimes in, their enemies, often with amusing results. Also, in German, it's known as a Snotzogger, which is amazing. In the current game, this is represented by it being a pretty powerful gun with a randomised amount of attacks and damage, which makes it two things. One, the most reliable version of the gun yet seen on the tabletop, and two, the most boring version of it.
So we thought that today we'd take you through every iteration of the gun's rules, because they've handled it in some quite different ways, and how they handled it tells you something about the design philosophy at play in each era.
So strap in, snotlings, we're going on an adventure.
The first playable appearance of the Shokk attack gun was in 1991's Here We Go, one of several orc-themed books released during 40k's first edition. Well, okay, technically we're pretty sure it was in White Dwarf issue 133 first, since they tended to print some stuff from these books slightly earlier in White Dwarf to get you in the mood to buy them. But you know what I mean, it's the same rules. I mean, what are you gonna do, go check if we're right? Oh, and the first non-playable appearance was in Where the Orcs from 1990, but it was purely fluff and its name was slightly different. And I don't want to say there was maybe too much going on with the Here We Go iteration of the weapon, but they did dedicate 8 whole pages of the book towards discussing it and showing how it works. We have looked at many entire army lists shorter than that. So if you're looking at the timeline underneath me right now and were wondering why this edition was by far the biggest part of the video, well, now you know why.
The Shokk attack gun is described as one of the most bizarre weapons the Orc Mech Boys have ever created. A spinning ramshackle marriage of teleporter and force field technology, the Shokk attack gun is able to open a tunnel through the warp, allowing for living creatures to pass through, protected by a force field. However, since orcs consider the creatures of the warp to be definitely un-orky in the nastiest way possible, and so won't go through the tunnel, and grots have too much self-preservation to be lured into going in there either, the only remaining candidates to take the trip are snotlings, as they aren't smart enough to be scared of anything until it's already happening to them. So, to actually use the Shokk attack gun, the mech boy needed to be accompanied by a runt herd and an amount of snotlings. Unlike our examples here, these snotlings were technically supposed to be mounted on 40mm square bases and should have 9 incredibly cramped snotlings on there. You also needed 2 blast templates, a 1-inch and a 2-inch one, an innie hole and an outie hole to the warp, respectively. Although the entrance one can be any size, really, 1 inch is just the recommended size. Should you wish to put a 2-foot wide template down to annoy your opponent, there is nothing to stop you beyond your own sense of decency.
If the mech had not moved in that turn, then they could choose to fire the Shokk attack gun, and to do so you placed the 1-inch entrance template in front of the first snotling base you wished to send. You would then remove the snotlings as they had gone into the tunnel entrance. You could send as many snotlings as you wanted through the hole, regardless of how far they'd have to move to do so. This is canonically explained with the following sentence: "Their burst of speed may be ascribed to their unfettered enthusiasm to reach the inviting dark hole." I'm just gonna let you sit with that sentence for a while. This odd phrasing is actually a nod to a little bit of fluff that runt herds train their Shokk attack team snotlings to jump into any hole that they see, so they'll do so without hesitation when the time comes. In Universe, herd squigs were needed to retrieve any snotlings who jumped down any nearby animal burrows or into the barrels of any orc artillery. Anyway, once these snotlings were all snuggled up in their inviting dark hole, you could then decide to immediately open the exit or wait to do so in a subsequent turn's shooting phase. although if you did the latter, then the mech would need to continue to remain stationary, lest the warp tunnel collapse and all the snotlings lost.
To open the exit hole, you'd take the 2-inch template and, since the gun had unlimited range, place it anywhere on the table that the mech could see, and was within his firing arc. You then rolled the d6 to figure out how the exit would scatter. On a 5 or a 6 it hit the target. On a 1 to 4 it would scatter in a given direction 3d6 inches. They had to use this system since 40k had not yet been blessed by the glory of the scatter dice. Once that was decided, the snotlings poured out onto whatever was underneath the template, and you consulted a different table depending on what type of unit the target was. The mech could choose to keep the portal open across multiple turns if you wanted, which would follow the target even if it moved. So if you hit a vehicle, you could keep sending snotlings at it turn after turn, provided you actually had the snotlings to do so. Speaking of vehicles, if a vehicle was hit, you'd roll a d6 and add +3 for each additional snotling base that was sent through that turn. You'd then consult this table, which gave you a nice description of what would happen. These were pretty varied, from jamming up the steering to killing individual crew members, to preventing the vehicle's exhaust from working and making the crew have to abandon it. Also, exploding. Exploding was an option.
However, there was a preoccupation with the snotling's digestive system in the higher end of the results, with 2 of them dedicated to the snotling's fungus-based diet, creating a truly astonishing amount of flatulence. The first being that the terror of the warp-based trip caused them to emit so much gas that the crew of the target vehicle must evacuate as it becomes a ticking time bomb, potentially exploding from all the pent-up gas. The second was similar, but the snotlings were intentionally fed
a battle breakfast of fungus gruel and toasted squig washed down with spore juice. The effect of this on the snotling digestive system would be bad enough, but the distracted journey through the warp has made things much worse. The emerging snotlings are suffering from dire and uncontrollable flatulence.
This caused the vehicle to fill up with a fetid green vapour, which killed the crew and steamed out of the now useless vehicle, with no troopers not wearing power or Terminator armour even able to get within 6 inches of this new biological hazard. On account of the farts, you see, Warhammer 40,000 is a very serious game. Then there's the final result, in which a snotling just defecates into the driver's ear, their left ear specifically, if you were wondering, which caused the whole vehicle to overturn. If the target was a Dreadnought or Terminator, there was a separate table to roll on. This was very similar to the first table, with many causing permanent damage to bits of the target, or causing them to go out of control, or having snotlings materialise inside the occupant of the suit and killing them instantly. A particularly interesting one is where the person inside the suit's face is mauled by a terrified snotling, and their blood-curdling death cry is such that it unnerves all around them. Of course, there was, once again, a result involving getting gassed to death, and one in which the tiny goblin would do a poo in the pilot's ear, the right one this time. Balance is restored. This involved yet another d6 roll, and I think we might need to just read some of these verbatim.
1. The model moves around in a 3-inch diameter circle for the rest of the game while the occupant tries to empty his ear. The model may do nothing else. 2. The model comes to an immediate halt and drops face down on the ground with a crash. The driver is suffocated to death by the snotling's bodily fluids. 6. The occupant has fought orcs before and knows how to deal with situations like this. He ignores the malodorous sticky goo running out of his ear and coolly turns his face to bite the snotling's head off. The target is therefore unaffected by the shock attack and may continue to fight normally. They thought way too much about this. Wait, I've just realised that this is technically our Halloween video for this year. And there we go. We got a brand new light up pumpkin and everything. If the template hit enemy infantry, then the snotling bases were placed on the table and they went into hand-to-hand combat with them, albeit in a frenzied state, adding +2 to their hit rolls and moving at double pace. And if the shot didn't hit anything, and with 3d6 of scatter that's quite likely, then the snotlings were placed on the table at the exit, huddled together, immobilised and terrified until a unit came within 8 inches of them. If they were an enemy, the snotlings would charge them with the same frenzied attack rules as before. And if it was an orc, they'd run to them and cling to them for comfort, preventing the orcs from moving or firing until an enemy came within 8 inches, causing the snotlings to run off and attack them instead. Also, it lets us know that snotlings see the orcs as their big friends, which shows us that not only are snotlings kind of adorable, but also wildly bad at reading a situation. There were also rules for doing ranging shots to make sure where the portal would open before committing snotling bases to it, if you felt it needed to add another step to proceedings. So if it actually hit something like a vehicle or dreadnought, it was almost guaranteed to cause some kind of permanent, often flatulence-based damage. However, it was just so much for a single weapon. Maybe a little too much, we'd say. And GW seemingly agreed, because the next time it'd show up, it would take up a lot less pages. But before we get to that, a word from this video's sponsor.
If you like this video's thumbnail art, then you'll probably like today's sponsor, Crippled Giraffe Decals, since it was drawn by their main man, Alex. They sell stickers from multiple wonderful artists from all around the world. And me. The stickers are high quality laminated things and so can survive daylight and weather for over 2 years. And shipping is just $1 in the US or $2 worldwide. As well as a host of existing great designs, there's a handful of new ones for October, both Halloween and Orktober themed, including a new one that I did, which is Scar themed. Because I'm me. So if you're looking for a gift for a fellow wargamer, or just looking for something nice to decorate your surroundings, then check out etsy.com/shop/crippledgiraffedecals. Link is very much in the description. With 2nd edition, we saw the rise of the 40k Codex format to contain all the information for playing a particular faction, rather than the scattershot approach taken in 1st edition, where your rules could be spread between several books, magazines, periodicals, or small notes left under a bin behind your local games workshop. In 1994, the Orcs got their first Codex, and the Shokk attack gun returned in a retooled state. It only took 2 pages to explain now. That's progress. So once again, a mech boy with a Shokk attack gun would enter the game with an amount of snotling bases and a runt herd in tow. To fire the gun, you'd removed the snotling bases you wished to fire and placed a 2-inch blast template where you intended to hit, once again with unlimited range. You'd then roll the scatter and artillery dice. Glorious, glorious scatter dice. Scattering the shot the amount of inches of the artillery dice roll in the direction the scatter dice said. Unless the scatter dice rolled a direct hit, in which case you wouldn't scatter, or you rolled a misfire on the artillery one, in which case you rolled on the misfire table, which either stopped the gun from firing for a turn or destroyed it and the mech boy. However, if the blast marker actually hit something, it once again could do a variety of things depending on what was hit. This time the target categories were Dreadnoughts, Robots, Wraithguards and Terminators, Foot Troops, Vehicles, Support Weapons and Bunkers. Each had their own table which you'd consult after rolling a d6.
For the first category, that I propose we rename Big Lads because its original name is far too unwieldy, each result does some permanent damage, whether simply being a snotling getting gummed up in something or outright killing the occupant. Rolling a 6 would do so in a way that would leave the big lad ominously walking across the battlefield each turn until it hit something or was destroyed. Foot troops were slightly better equipped to deal with it, with rolling a 1 doing nothing, but a roll of 2 to 5 inflicted a wound upon anything touched by the template, although you did get an armor save, and a roll of 6 had a snotling appear inside the affected model, killing them instantly regardless of how many wounds it had or what armor it was wearing. Vehicles were affected in similar ways to the walkers, with the snotlings either getting caught inside moving parts, or causing a commotion inside the vehicle leading to weapons breaking or even the vehicle exploding. On a 6, a terrified snotling would latch itself to the driver's head, causing the vehicle to lurch forward d10 inches and overturn. The stunned crew finished off by the frenzied little goblins. Support weapons got the simplest one, with the result either causing snotlings to materialise inside the ammo, making the weapon explode, or them getting mulched up in the workings of the gun, meaning that every time it fired from now on it had a chance to explode. And finally, in the confined space of a bunker, the frenzied little snotlings would either instantly kill one model inside it, wound everything but allow for armor saves, or once again cause ammunition to explode, instantly killing all in the bunker. My advice for people in a bunker when the Shokk attack gun is out during 2nd edition is hope it misses. And if it did miss, then the snotlings would just disappear now, so you no longer had to worry about them being all clingy. You may have noticed that some of these effects from the shots are pretty similar to some of the 1st edition results, although thankfully the more scatological ones have been omitted. There's not even a single reference to a snotling's bowels in these tables. Again, that's progress. Still, there's a whole page of charts. I reckon we can trim that down a little bit more.
The Shokk attack gun was absent from the 3rd edition Orc Codex, one of the victims of 3rd edition's streamlining, but it would reappear with a new model in 2008's 4th edition Codex. And not to let our bias show too much, but this is the best version, and if you don't agree, you're factually wrong. Okay, to be a little more reasonable about it, we think that this version managed to find the sweet spot between silly bullshit and streamlined play. The first big change is that there's no more snotling models needed for ammo. Your mech is just assumed to have a few knocking about whenever he needs them, so you don't need to worry about rationing out your supply, or the hassle of painting up a bunch of the little buggers. And, as shown on the then new model, now snotlings are sucked into the gun rather than the gun creating an inviting dark hole of a portal for the snotlings to dive into. Well, okay, that's actually just what the mini implies, and the fluff in these later books still reads like it works the old way, which doesn't really jive with the later minis, but whatever. Mechanically, the way it worked was that the gun was a single-shot ordnance blast weapon with a 60-inch range, which would become its new standard, farewell unlimited range. However, its strength was randomly decided by rolling 2d6. When combined with the blast's AP2, which at the time meant that it would bypass up to 2+ armor saves, and how many troops on 25mm bases could fit under a big pie plate, this could potentially be a very devastating weapon. But there was more to it, and not just the fact that due to how the old scatter rules worked and the size of the template, this gun was technically more accurate than most orc guns.
No, if you rolled a double or an 11 on the strength roll, then you consulted the chart. On a double 1, the gun exploded, leaving a crackling orb of unreality in its place, so your mech and any models within d6 inches were simply removed from play. Double 2 meant the gun went out of control and your opponent got to pick where the shot was aimed. A double 3 meant the exit hole showed up in the wrong place and you must target the nearest unit to the original target, friend or foe. Double 4 meant the snotlings simply exploded out of the warp, showering the target in viscera and bone. This meant that you had to switch to the small blast template and the strength and AP of the shot became 6. Double 5 was a personal favourite. The mech accidentally fired himself instead, putting him into base-to-base contact with the target, and was treated as if he had charged that turn. A possibly 60-inch charge. An 11 would result in a malfunction of the gun that meant the portal was very, very tiny, meaning only the model under the very centre hole of the template would be affected. The shot was only strength 10 and the gun may not fire next turn. Finally, on a double 6, the gun would open up a hole into the warp itself, and all the horror within would momentarily be unleashed upon the mortal realm. This meant that any infantry model under the template would be removed from play. No wounds, no armor saves. Removed from play. Vehicles would receive an automatic penetrating hit.
Now, there was a lot more that could go wrong with this iteration of the rules, and the variety of things that could go wrong meant that every time you used it was a real gamble. Sure, it could give you about as powerful a shot as was physically possible in the game, something able to wipe out Terminator squads in a single shot as easily as it would Grots, but also it could catapult your army's leader wildly across the board, or leave a huge crater instantly taking your mech and whatever was around him out of the game. And we understand why such rules mean that some people were just never going to use the gun. It had a lot of ways that it could go wrong, it was not a weapon that you could trust in a competitive setting. But to us, that's just what orcs are all about. It's all a dice roll, and whether you succeed or fail, it's probably going to be a bit of a laugh regardless. The next time the Orcs got a Codex was 7th edition, and the 2014 version of these rules stuck more or less to the same as the previous version, but with a few minor tweaks. Although for some reason the flavour text was removed, so you lost all context as to what was happening with each result. A new player would have to merely speculate as to why a double 4 was signified with a sploosh.
Some of the results were altered more significantly though. A double 1 no longer took out those around the big mech as well, so only the mech paid the price for his hubris. And on a double 6, rather than doing the whole remove from play thing, the gun instead gained the Vortex special rule, which meant the Ordnance Blast template placed down would become a bit of impassable terrain on the table. Each turn you roll the 2d6 with a scatter dice, and the template would move around the table doing its full damage to anything it came into contact with, until you rolled a double on the scatter, whereupon it would dissipate. I suppose this did mean if you were throwing around enough Vortex weapons, you'd run out of blast templates. I mean, we didn't really play during 7th. Was running out of blast templates really ever an actual issue? Gaining the Vortex rule also meant it became a destroyer weapon, which meant, among other things, rather than a standard vehicle damage roll, it rolled on this table instead. If you want context as to how much damage d6 plus 6 hull points was, well, a battle wagon had 4 hull points. Destroyer weapons were intended to do stuff like take down titans. A Shadow Sword's volcano cannon was a D weapon, for example. So yeah, some minor changes mechanically, but the biggest new thing was just taking advantage of a mechanic that wasn't in the game the last time the Shokk attack gun got rules.
And if anything deserved to be a D weapon, then the gun that occasionally rips a hole into the warp itself is probably it. Once we hit 2018's 8th edition Orc Codex, the Shokk attack gun's rules would once again change, since 40k was again greatly streamlined. A lot of the fiddlier rules for war gear were simplified, as well as removing blast templates entirely, so we ended up with a Shokk attack gun that was simply a ranged heavy weapon with most things randomly rolled for except armour penetration, which was always -5. If the strength, which was rolled on 2d6, was 11+, then the weapon did an additional d3 mortal wounds. So although this is absolutely a step down in the goofy fun department, it still allowed for some kind of fun results, like it potentially only firing a single strength 2 shot that, should it actually cause damage, would inflict 6 wounds. Which is sort of the equivalent of hitting your shin on the living room table and your bones exploding. The gambling aspect of the weapon is still technically there, but it's more along the lines of, is this shot going to be powerful, as opposed to, will this shot lose me the game, but in a kind of funny way. This version of the gun would reappear, unchanged, in 2021's 9th edition Orc Codex, before being tweaked again for 2024's 10th edition Codex, where it has random attacks and damage but consistent strength, with 1 unit hit by it a turn made to take a battle shock test. Which, again, is probably about as consistently useful as the Shokk attack gun has ever been, but I don't know, it's just a little bit dull.
And there we go, we're all caught up to present day.
But what can you take from this astonishingly niche video?
Well, I suppose it's that by looking at this weapon that pushes the limits of how complex a single weapon can be in 40k, you can tell a lot about the game itself in different time periods. During 1st edition, it was as unwieldy as possible, making it faffy to fire, but also offering a lot of texture to what you were doing. It was a methodical operation with plenty of room for comedic results, a thing possible when there's still a bit of role-playing knocking around in the game. 2nd edition streamlined it into something more usable in the full-on wargame the game had become, but still retained its own particular kind of complexity. 4th's was streamlined yet further into something relatively simple but more chaotic, and 7th kept that but removed the fun flavour text, obfuscating what's actually going on for no good reason. And the 8th, 9th and 10th edition versions, well, they're really just a regular weapon with some random stats and all the rough edges sanded down smooth. All the tables are gone and the weapon has had most of its downsides removed, presumably in an effort to have the weapon be viable in higher level play.
I think it's pretty obvious that we think it's absolutely lost its spark in recent editions, but ultimately things change, And to be fair, we've been in favour of many of the changes to this weapon over the years. Plus, as 40k and the staff writing it grew, things like the Shokk attack gun were destined to not stay static. It was always one of the outliers, requiring far more rules and therefore explanations than the average weapon, and thus meant that it felt changes in design philosophy greater than most. Still, going through every iteration of the gun has left us hoping that whenever the Orcs do next get a Codex, that they try and claw back a little bit of the complexity of the Shokk attack gun, if nothing else to bring back some of its uniquely fun flavour.
Just maybe don't claw back so much that we start having to worry about what the Snotlings ate last. Now we're going to be talking about Snotlings and Shokk attack guns. My Patreon is www.patreon.com.uk/Snipe and Whip. Give me money and I'll stop doing this.